The second time I heard the debate club chant my name like a warning, I did not stay to explain myself. That was the first thing I changed. In my first life, I stayed in room 6A until the fluorescent lights flickered and the janitor knocked twice, begging people who had already decided I was disposable to please understand that I had not written the fake evidence cards, had not forged tournament citations, had not sabotaged the finals brief, and had never once wanted our star speaker to collapse on stage in front of judges from 3 universities. I stayed because I thought truth needed my voice. I stayed because Coach Renner said, "Mina, if you walk out now, it will look guilty." I stayed because my best argument, my worst habit, and my deepest wound were all the same thing. I believed if I spoke clearly enough, fair people would become fair. They did not. By the end of that week, Debate Club lost the regional finals, my academic integrity record was flagged, and Celeste Arden, our beloved star speaker, stood in front of the school assembly with tears shining on her cheeks while she said she trusted the wrong researcher. The wrong researcher was me. The girl who spent nights building her cases, checking her statistics, rewriting her rebuttals, and taping emergency cue cards under the lectern because Celeste's perfect confidence had always depended on someone else remembering the truth for her. Years later, when law schools rejected me with polite phrases like concerns around ethical judgment, I died in a room full of old notebooks and unfinished appeals, still hearing Celeste's final round speech break apart as she forgot every lie we had once hidden for her. Then darkness. Then chalk dust. Then the sound of Coach Renner slapping a folder against the debate room table. I opened my eyes to see the same finals week brief in front of me, the same team gathered around the same table, and Celeste Arden smiling at me with the softness of a girl who had never carried her own evidence. "Mina," she said, sliding a stack of blank index cards toward me, "you'll fix my prep tonight, right?" I stood up, picked up my bag, and said, "No, I'm walking out." Nobody moved at first. Debate students are trained to respond quickly, but shock has a way of turning even future lawyers into furniture. Room 6A was our war room, though the school called it the seminar learning space because private schools fear honest names. Every wall was covered with butcher paper, argument maps, crossfire drills, speaking order charts, judge preference notes, quotes about rhetoric, and a giant countdown written by Celeste in gold marker. 4 days TO finals. The air smelled like dry erase ink, stale coffee, and the desperate sweat of ambitious teenagers pretending stress was passion. Around the table sat the team that had ruined me once. Daniel, our second speaker, who loved fairness until fairness cost him status. Imani, our whip speaker, who could slice an argument cleanly and then pretend she was sorry. Theo, timekeeper and tech lead, who saw everything and said nothing until it was safe. Coach Renner, the former national champion who treated debate like a religion and Celeste like its chosen prophet. And Celeste herself, our captain, school darling, scholarship magnet, and once-in-a-generation speaker, according to every adult who had heard her speak after I wrote her case. She had black hair always tied with a navy ribbon, bright eyes that seemed sincere from any distance, and a voice that could make a lie sound like civic duty. In my first life, I loved her voice. Not romantically. Worse. Devotionally. I thought being trusted by Celeste meant I mattered. She would lean over my notes, touch my arm, and whisper, "You're the only one who understands how my mind works." I did not understand then that what she called her mind was mostly my labor, wearing her confidence. Coach Renner laughed once, certain I had made some dramatic joke. "Mina, sit down. We have 4 days until regional finals." I remained standing. I know. Then this is not the moment for mood. Celeste's smile trembled at the edges. "Mina, did I do something?" There was the first soft hook. Celeste never began with accusation. She began by making you accuse yourself. In my first life, that question would have made me panic. Did she do something? How could I say yes when she remembered my birthday, sent me voice notes before exams, told everyone I was the brain behind the team whenever nobody important was listening? How could I accuse the girl whose blazer I fixed before tournaments, whose speeches I timed, whose hands I held when she said she was afraid of failing her mother? This time, I looked at her blank index cards and saw not a friend, not a teammate, but evidence waiting to become my handwriting. I'm no longer preparing Celeste's speaking materials, I said. I'm no longer editing evidence cards I didn't source. I'm no longer staying late without minutes, witnesses, or version history. I'm leaving debate club effective now. Daniel sat forward. You can't quit finals week. I just did. Imani's eyes narrowed. This is sabotage. I turned to her.
No.
Sabotage is when someone quietly breaks a system and blames the person who maintained it. Coach Renner's face darkened. Enough. Whatever resentment you're carrying can wait until after regionals. That's what you said last time, I replied before I could stop myself. Silence landed hard. Celeste tilted her head. Last time, my heart knocked once against my ribs. Dangerous. The dead version of me had slipped through. I adjusted. Every time. Every tournament. Every crisis. Every time someone asks whether the cards are clean, you say we'll deal with it after we win. Coach Renner looked away first. That told me more than denial would have. The truth was that our debate club did not win because Celeste was a genius. It won because everyone around her treated winning as a reason to forgive small corruptions until those corruptions became the room's architecture. Celeste was excellent at delivery. She could hold silence, control pacing, turn a judge's frown into a moment of intimacy. But facts bored her unless they glittered. She hated warrants, hated citations, hated the ugly work of tracing a statistic to its source and discovering it meant less than the article headline promised. That was my job. Officially, I was research lead. Unofficially, I was the girl who caught Celeste before she fell into her own exaggerations. When she claimed a policy reduced youth homelessness by 63%, I found the actual pilot study and changed it to showed promising early reductions in shelter reliance among a limited sample. She hated the weaker wording and changed it back in speech. When she told a judge she had spoken directly to displaced students during a community outreach visit that never happened, I pulled her aside afterward and begged her not to use personal anecdotes she could not verify. She cried and said she only wanted people to care. When she invented a quotation from a Nobel laureate during semifinals, Coach Renner called it rhetorical compression. By finals week in my first life, I was not cleaning mistakes. I was laundering lies. Then, when the other team challenged 3 fabricated evidence cards in the final round, Celeste froze. Coach Renner demanded the prep folder. My handwriting was on every card because I had rewritten them to sound less false. Celeste cried. Coach Renner protected his star. I became the ethical failure that allowed everyone else to remain talented. Now, as I walked toward the door, Celeste stood so quickly her chair scraped backward. Mina, wait. Her voice cracked, and the room leaned toward it automatically. She was good. Even I felt the pull.
Please.
I know you're stressed. We all are. But you're my partner.
Partner.
In debate, that word meant something sacred. You trusted your partner to catch arguments you missed, slide notes across the table, cover your dropped point in rebuttal, and stand beside you when a judge misunderstood. In my first life, I thought partnership meant loyalty, no matter what. In this life, loyalty without ethics looked like an accomplice agreement. No, I said. I was your memory. Her face changed. Just a flicker. Too fast for anyone else. That's cruel. It's accurate. Coach Renner moved between us, lowering his voice. Mina, you walk out now, and you lose your recommendation. There it was. The real argument. Not team. Not friendship. Not principle. Access. The letter I needed for university. The letter he withheld in my first life while saying he was waiting for the investigation to resolve. I reached into my folder and pulled out a printed resignation letter I had written at 4 a.m. in the old timeline's muscle memory, though this morning I had technically only been reborn for 27 minutes. I've emailed this to you, the principal and the activities coordinator, I said. It requests that all debate materials using my research be removed unless proper citations and version records are attached. Coach Renner stared at the letter. You planned this. I smiled, and it felt like a scar opening. You have no idea. I left before they could rearrange the scene around me. That mattered. In my first life, I stayed in the debate room after every accusation, every emotional ambush, every team conversation, until my words piled up like debris and someone else chose which pieces to show. This time, I walked through the corridor with my shoulders straight, even though my knees felt loose and my hands trembled inside my blazer pockets. Behind me, room 6A exploded into voices. Celeste saying my name, Daniel asking if we could still use the brief, Coach Renner snapping that nobody touched the folders, Imani saying, "She's trying to ruin us." Maybe I was. Or maybe I was stepping out of the ruin before they set it on fire and called me smoke. At the end of the hall, I stopped beside the trophy cabinet. Debate photos lined the shelves, Celeste holding plaques, Celeste shaking hands with judges, Celeste smiling under banners, Celeste beside me cropped just far enough that my name tag was unreadable. There was one photo from last year's quarterfinal, my face turned toward her, mouth open mid-whisper as I fed her a statistic she had forgotten. The caption beneath it read, "Celeste Arden leads Team 2 victory." I took a photo of the photo, not because it proved anything by itself, because evidence begins with noticing what has always been visible. My second stop was the library, not home. In my first life, I ran home crying and gave them 5 unsupervised hours to edit the shared drive. This time, I went straight to Mrs. Vale, the librarian, whose affection for citation rules bordered on spiritual. Every school has one adult who knows where the bodies are buried because students ask to print them at 7:45 a.m. Mrs. Vale looked up from repairing a torn paperback and frowned at my face. Debate club? Yes. Finally, I almost laughed. People keep saying that to me. She removed her reading glasses. Because some disasters introduce themselves early. I placed a USB drive on her desk. I need to archive debate research files with timestamps. Can the library server save read-only copies? She studied me carefully. Are we preserving academic materials or protecting you from children with expensive blazers? Both. She nodded once.
Seat.
For the next hour, we downloaded my research drafts, email attachments, tournament briefs, citation spreadsheets, and comment histories from the debate shared drive. The version history told a story uglier than any confession. My original cards with cautious claims, Celeste's later edits exaggerating them, Coach Renner's comments saying, punchier, stronger impact, make judge feel urgency, Daniel's notes asking whether sources were safe enough, Imani's private comment on one card, if challenged, Mina can explain. If challenged, Mina can explain. I stared at that sentence until the room blurred. Mrs. Vale saw it too. She did not soften her voice when she said, "Print that one." So I did. By lunch, the school knew I had walked out. The story mutated in predictable directions. Mina betrayed the team. Mina got jealous of Celeste. Mina had a breakdown because Coach Renner chose Celeste for first speaker again. Mina was holding the finals brief hostage. Mina had always wanted Celeste to fail. I sat under the far stairwell with a sandwich I could barely taste and listened to people decide who I was while I still breathed nearby. It should have hurt more. Maybe it would later. For now, fear had become too practical to waste on every whisper. I had 4 days until finals. 4 days until Celeste stood before university judges and tried to deliver a case built on shortcuts she no longer had me to patch. 4 days until the lies either collapsed or adapted into something worse. I needed to make sure they collapsed publicly but safely, without allowing Coach Renner to place the debris back in my lap. That meant I needed the opposing team, not to help them cheat, to help them ask the questions our judges should have asked all along. Finals week would be against St. Bartholomew's, a school we hated because they wore green blazers, argued like knives, and had beaten us 2 years ago on a technical definition challenge that Coach Renner still called cowardly. Their captain was Lena Moreno, a girl with sharp eyebrows, sharper prep, and absolutely no patience for theatrical nonsense. In my first life, she challenged Celeste's evidence in the final round, but too late and too broadly. This time, I sent her one message from a public account. Check every citation in Northmere's housing case. Ask for original source context. Do not trust paraphrase cards. She replied 7 minutes later. Who is this? I typed. Someone who should have told you earlier. Then I deleted nothing. Let the record exist. On Tuesday morning, Coach Renner summoned me to the activities office. Principal Harrow sat behind the desk with the expression of someone who had been told this was a student conflict and hoped to keep believing it. Celeste sat to the side, eyes red, fingers wrapped around a tissue. I knew that tissue. She carried them dry, pre-crumpled, ready for rooms where she needed to look like she had been crying longer than she had. Daniel and Imani stood behind her like witnesses, in search of a script. Coach Renner placed my resignation letter on the desk. Mina's actions have jeopardized the entire team days before finals. Principal Harrow looked at me. Mina, do you understand the seriousness of walking out during competition week? Yes. Would you like to explain? In my first life, explaining became quicksand. This time, I opened my folder and slid forward 3 printed pages. These are examples of evidence cards altered after my drafts, with version histories showing exaggerations, missing source context, and unverifiable claims. I resigned because I do not want my name attached to materials I cannot ethically defend. Celeste made a tiny sound. Mina, why didn't you just talk to me? I turned to her. I did. Last tournament after you invented the outreach anecdote. Before semifinals after you changed the shelter statistic. At practice, after you used the Nobel quote that doesn't exist. Daniel stared at her. Imani looked away. Coach Renner interrupted. Debate involves persuasive framing. Fabricated quotes are not framing. You are being rigid. You are being recorded in meeting minutes, I replied. Principal Harrow looked at Mrs. Vale, who had appeared quietly in the doorway with a notebook. Librarians move like consequences. At Mina's request, she said, the activities office approved a support person for documentation. Coach Renner's jaw tightened. Good. Witnesses made him uglier. Celeste began crying then. Not dramatically. Just enough to pull the room back toward her. I'm not perfect, she whispered. I know everyone thinks I am, but I'm not. I rely on Mina because she's brilliant. Maybe I trusted some wording too much, but I would never lie on purpose. Debate is everything to me. Principal Harrow softened.
Of course he did.
Adults often prefer remorse that arrives before accountability because it saves them work. I waited until her voice faded, then asked, can Celeste explain the source behind the youth homelessness reduction statistic right now? The room stilled. Celeste's eyes flicked toward Coach Renner. He frowned. This is not a cross-examination. Finals will be. I looked at Principal Harrow. If she understands the case, she should be able to explain it without my cards. Celeste's tears hung motionless on her lashes. I'm emotional right now. Judges won't pause because you're emotional. Imani finally spoke. Mina, that's harsh. I turned to her.
No.
Harsh is building a championship case around claims your first speaker can't explain and then blaming the researcher when challenged. Principal Harrow picked up one of the pages I had printed. His brow furrowed. Coach Renner, why does this comment say, if challenged, Mina can explain? Imani went pale. Coach Renner did what skilled adults do when cornered by specifics. He moved to process. We can review internal preparation after regionals.
No, I said.
That sentence is why I left before regionals. Principal Harrow did not decide everything then. Administrators rarely become brave in one meeting. But he ordered that all finals evidence cards be reviewed by the library for citation compliance before use. Coach Renner looked like he had swallowed glass. Celeste looked at me like I had cut a rope she did not know was visible. The library review became the second trap I did not have to set, only request. By Tuesday afternoon, half the team was in the library with Mrs. Vale, checking every evidence card against original sources. It was a massacre with page numbers.
Claims shrank.
Quotes vanished. Impact statistics lost their shine. One card about housing policy came from an opinion blog mislabeled as a university report. Another quoted an article summary instead of the actual study, reversing the conclusion. Celeste's favorite line, every dollar invested returns 14 in social stability, turned out to be from a campaign brochure written by an advocacy group that cited no data at all. She had delivered it in 4 tournaments like scripture. Mrs. Vale crossed it out with a red pen and said, "Not evidence." Celeste sat at the table, increasingly pale, as her speech turned from thunder into weather report. "But judges respond to moral clarity," she protested. Mrs. Vale did not look up. "Judges can respond to whatever they like. The library responds to sources." Theo, tech lead, covered his mouth. Imani pretended to read. Daniel looked sick. I sat at a different table working on my homework, no longer part of the team, but present as the person whose name had been on the drafts. Coach Renner hovered, unable to stop the review without looking openly unethical. By 4 o'clock, their finals brief had lost 30% of its evidence and 80% of its drama. Celeste looked at me across the library. For one moment, the mask dropped. Her expression said, "Fix it." My expression said, "Remember yourself." Wednesday was rebuttal practice, and that was when everyone else saw what I had carried for years. Celeste did not know where her arguments lived. She knew the beautiful version, the spoken version, the version polished by applause and my late-night repairs. She did not know the bones. Without my prep sheets, she forgot which statistics belonged to which source, mixed up pilot programs from different countries, attributed Daniel's analysis to a judge comment from last season, and gave 3 contradictory definitions of structural vulnerability in one drill. Coach Renner stopped her again and again. Reset. Again. "No, Celeste, that card was cut. You can't say 14-1 anymore." "No, don't use the anecdote." Her face grew tighter with each correction. Finally, during a crossfire drill, Daniel asked, "Can you explain the mechanism between rent stabilization and youth shelter dependency?" Celeste stared at him. "You know the mechanism." "I'm asking as opponent. Mina's the one who wrote that block." The room went silent. She realized it too late. Imani lowered her pen. Theo looked at the floor. Coach Renner said, "Too quickly. The team collaborates." Daniel's voice was quiet. "Celeste, do you understand the mechanism?" She stood. "I understand enough to win." There it was. The philosophy beneath everything. Enough to win. Not enough to be true. Not enough to defend. Not enough to deserve the students whose futures were attached to her speeches. Enough to win. In my first life, I worshipped winners because I thought winning proved worth. In my second, I understood that winning can be a costume truth is forced to sew. After practice, Daniel found me outside the vending machines. He looked terrible, which improved him. "Did you know it was this bad?" he asked. I bought a bottle of water and took my time opening it. "Yes." "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I stared at him until he looked away. "I did. I mean to me. You heard me last season when I told Celeste the Nobel quote was fake. You laughed and said, 'It sounds true though.'" He flinched.
Good.
Memory should not always be comfortable. "I'm sorry." That's a start. He leaned against the wall, rubbing his face. "If we pull out now, the school loses its place. If we compete, St. Bart's will destroy us. Maybe you should let them." "That's easy for you to say." You walked out. I almost laughed. You think walking away from something that already owns your recommendation, your reputation, and your friendships is easy? He had no answer. After a moment, he said, "Celeste says you messaged Lena Moreno." My hand stilled. "Does she?" "Did you?" "I told St. Bart's to check sources. That could be considered interference. So could fabricated evidence." He looked down the corridor toward the debate room. "She thinks you want her humiliated." I thought about the first life, Celeste sobbing in assembly, me standing behind her like a shield while she sharpened the blame against my ribs. Did I want humiliation? Once, yes. I wanted her to feel the room turn cold, to hear whispers attached to her name, to lose the future she took from mine. But rebirth had changed the texture of revenge. I did not want her humiliated for sport. I wanted the lies to stand unsupported long enough for everyone to see they had no legs. "I want her to answer her own case," I said. "If that humiliates her, ask what she was standing on." Thursday, the day before finals, Celeste tried to bring me back. Not through Coach Renner, Not through Daniel, not in public. She came to my house. That was how I knew she was frightened. Celeste Arden did not visit the small apartment blocks near the train line unless debate outreach required a photo. My mother opened the door while I was cooking instant noodles. "There's a girl here with funeral eyes," she called. I nearly dropped the saucepan. Celeste stood in the hallway wearing her school coat, hair loose from rain, holding a folder against her chest. Without the debate room around her, she looked younger, almost ordinary, which was the most dangerous version of her because it made my heart remember things before my brain could stop it. My mother looked between us. "Door stays open," she said, and went back inside without actually leaving earshot. Celeste gave a small, broken smile. "Your mum hates me. She has instincts."
Mina.
Her voice cracked on my name.
Please.
"I can't do finals without you." There it was. Not "I'm sorry." Not "you were right." Not "I lied." "I can't do finals without you." Need dressed as affection. I leaned against the doorframe. "Then don't do finals." She blinked. "You know I can't withdraw." "You can. You don't want to." "If I lose now, everything changes." My scholarship interview is next week. Coach's recommendation, the University Scouts, the Summer Institute. My name was destroyed last time those things mattered to you. Her face went still. Last time again. Rain ticked against the corridor window. I should have stepped back. I should have stayed fully inside the safe language of normal accusation. Instead, I was tired enough to be honest in the wrong shape. There is a version of me that stayed. She fixed your cards. She covered your mistakes. She stood beside you when evidence failed. You let them blame her. Celeste stared at me, and for the first time, I saw fear deeper than finals. Not fear that I knew what happened. Fear that somewhere inside her, she recognized it as possible. "I would never do that to you," she whispered. I looked at her. "You already started." She opened the folder. Inside were the old index cards she wanted me to revise. Some had my handwriting from earlier drafts. Some had her edits. Some had Coach Renner's comments. She had brought them like offerings. "Just help me make them clean," she said.
No exaggerations. No fake quotes.
"I'll say exactly what you write." That was the temptation. The old role offered back in better lighting. If I helped, the team might survive. Celeste might avoid collapse. My old friends might stop looking at me like a traitor. Coach Renner might still write something neutral. And maybe, if I wrote the truth carefully enough, finals could become ethical. But then what? Celeste would win another round on someone else's memory. The room would learn nothing. The next Mina would inherit the same chair. "No," I said. Her eyes filled. "You hate me." "I trusted you." "That's not an answer." "It is the answer." Her tears spilled then, and they might have been real. "I don't know who I am if I'm not good at this," she whispered. For the first time, pity moved through my anger. Not enough to change my mind. Enough to make my voice gentler. "Then find out before you stand in front of judges and lie again." She closed the folder slowly. "If I fall tomorrow, everyone will know you pushed me." "No," I said. "They'll know I stopped holding you up." That was the last thing I said before closing the door. Finals Fridays smelled like rain, polished wood, and institutional ambition. The regional debate championship was held in North Mears Auditorium because our school had the largest stage and the best live stream equipment, which meant the collapse I had once endured as a competitor and scapegoat would now happen at home. Banners hung from the balcony. Judges sat at a long table with laptops and water bottles. University representatives occupied the front rows. Students filled the upper seats, whispering, posting, waiting for brilliance. I arrived not as a debater, but as a student observer with a library volunteer badge Mrs. Vale had secured through what she called administrative stubbornness. My job was to help manage printed source packets for judges if evidence challenges arose. Coach Renner hated that. Celeste saw me near the side table and went white. She looked beautiful, of course. Navy blazer, ribbon, perfect posture, lips pale but steady. Daniel stood beside her flipping through his own cards like a man checking parachute straps. Imani whispered something to him.
Theo adjusted microphone.
St. Bartholomew's team sat opposite in green blazers, Lina Moreno at first speaker, expression sharp enough to cut fabric. When her eyes met mine, she gave the smallest nod. Not gratitude. Acknowledgement. The round topic was national housing policy for vulnerable youth. The same case. The same battlefield. The difference was that this time, the ground had been mapped. Celeste's opening speech began well. That was important. Collapse is more revealing when it begins with flight. Her voice filled the auditorium, rich and controlled. She framed housing as dignity, stability, intergenerational justice. She used one of the clean statistics correctly. She even explained the mechanism behind shelter dependency, not beautifully but accurately enough. For 2 minutes, I wondered if fear had made her honest. Then she reached for the old rhythm. I saw it happen in her shoulders before I heard it in her words. For every dollar invested, she said, communities receive $14 back in social stability, reduced policing, and restored futures. My stomach dropped. The card had been cut. Mrs. Vale had crossed it out. Coach Renner's pen froze. Daniel closed his eyes. Lena looked down at her notes and smiled without warmth. Celeste continued, gaining confidence from the familiar lie. This is not abstract. In one outreach conversation, a displaced student told us, a locked door is the difference between being a person and being a problem. The outreach conversation that never happened. The line she invented because judges loved it. The auditorium was silent, listening. Lies, when delivered well, still sound like truth until someone asks them where they live. Lena asked during cross-examination. Her voice was polite. That made it worse. Can you provide the source for the 14-to-1 return figure? Celeste smiled. It comes from a multi-sector urban stability analysis. Which organization produced that analysis? Celeste glanced at her cards. I knew those cards. The source line was blank because the real source had been removed. It was compiled from multiple studies. So, not a single analysis? It synthesizes findings. By whom? Celeste's smile tightened. I don't have the author name memorized. Lena nodded. Then let's move to your outreach anecdote. Which program conducted that conversation? Celeste's eyes flicked toward Coach Renner. He could not speak. He had trained her to perform dependence in prep rooms, not on stage. It was from community engagement research. Conducted by your team? By partner organizations. Which partner? Silence. Not long. 2 seconds, maybe. But debate silence is measured in blood pressure. Celeste looked at her cards again. Nothing there could save her. The lie required confidence, and confidence had run out of floor. I don't recall the exact organization. Lena's eyebrows lifted. You quoted a displaced student directly, but don't know who spoke to them? Celeste opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. In my first life, I slid her a rescue note at this moment. It said pivot to moral framing. She read it, recovered, then blamed me later when evidence still failed. This time, my hands stayed at my sides. The first lie broke. Then the others remembered they were fragile. Celeste stumbled through the rest of cross-examination, mixing up sources, overclaiming one study, retreating from another, then trying to reframe the challenge as missing the human stakes. Lena did not let her. Human stakes require accurate advocacy, she said, and half the auditorium inhaled. Daniel did what he could in second speech, but he was trapped between defending a case and avoiding the contaminated cards. Imani delivered a fierce whip speech that almost saved them on values, but facts are not decorative beams. Pull enough out and the roof sags. During the evidence challenge period, Lena formally requested verification for 3 claims. As library volunteer, I carried the printed source packet to the judges. My hands did not shake until I reached the table. One judge flipped through the packet. The 14-to-1 claim is not included. Mrs. Vale, seated nearby as citation officer, said it was removed during compliance review. The judge looked at Coach Renner. Why was it spoken? Coach Renner's face was unreadable. Celeste stared at the table in front of her. Daniel looked at her, then away. I stood close enough to hear her whisper. I forgot. Not I lied. Not I chose. I forgot. That was the title of her whole career. Forget the source. Forget the warning. Forget the girl who fixed it. Forget the line between persuasion and fraud. But finals week remembered. Northmere lost the final. Not narrowly. Decisively. St. Bartholomew's won on evidence ethics, mechanism clarity, and credibility under cross-examination. The auditorium applause felt strange, half admiration, half discomfort, because everyone had witnessed something more intimate than defeat. Celeste did not cry at first. That shocked people more than tears would have. She sat very still while Lena shook Daniel's hand, then Imani's, then Celeste's. Lena leaned close and said something I could not hear. Celeste flinched. Later, Lena told me, she said, "You speak beautifully. Stop making other people pay for what you refuse to learn." I wished I had said it, but maybe it was better from an opponent. Coach Renner gathered the team near the side exit, face stiff, with contained fury. Principal Harrow approached before he could speak privately. So did Mrs. Vale. So did 2 judges. Witnesses again. Always witnesses. We need to discuss why disallowed evidence appeared in the final round, one judge said. Coach Renner began. There was a preparation oversight. Celeste stood suddenly. No, everyone turned. Her voice was small, but the microphone near the judge's table still picked it up.
No.
I used it because I remembered it working before. The room quieted in waves. Coach Renner looked at her sharply. Celeste's eyes filled, but she kept speaking. Mina told me not to. Mrs. Vale removed it. Coach said to stay clean. I thought I could make it land and move on. Coach Renner's face changed at Coach said to stay clean, because it made him look better than he deserved, but also confirmed the evidence had been knowingly removed.
Celeste looked at me then.
And I thought if it failed, people would ask who wrote it before they asked why I said it. There it was. Not a full confession to every old harm. Not justice for the first life. But enough for this one. Principal Harrow's jaw tightened. Daniel whispered, Celeste. She shook her head.
I'm tired.
Her voice cracked. I'm tired of being brilliant at speeches I don't understand. The auditorium had not fully emptied. Students in the back rows were listening. Phones were probably recording. Coach Renner stepped forward. Celeste, stop. She laughed once, brokenly. That's the first time you've ever told me to stop before I won. He went pale. That line landed harder than she knew. Or maybe she knew exactly. Debate trains people to find the sentence that contains the whole argument. Principal Harrow ordered a closed review before any public statements. The judges suspended Northmere's team from awards consideration pending ethics review. Coach Renner was placed on leave from coaching duties. Celeste was escorted to the green room, not as a star protected from disappointment, but as a student who had admitted misconduct in front of half the tournament. I stood near the source packet table, still holding the folder that no longer needed me. Mrs. Vale touched my shoulder once. You did not push her, she said quietly. You stepped away from the fall zone. I swallowed hard. Why does it still hurt? Because you were standing there a long time. The school tried to contain the story, but debate scandals are uniquely impossible to silence because everyone involved thinks in arguments and receipts. By evening, clips had spread. Celeste failing to source the return figure, Lena asking about the outreach anecdote, Celeste saying she used it because it worked before, Celeste saying she thought people would ask who wrote it before why she said it. The last clip changed everything. It named the scapegoat mechanism without naming me directly, which somehow made people look for me harder. Daniel texted first. I'm sorry I let that sentence exist. I did not reply immediately. Imani sent a longer message, too polished, than a second one. That sounded like a speech.
Sorry.
I'm actually sorry. Theo sent a zip file titled Things You May Need If They Try Anything, containing microphone logs, shared drive access histories, and one photo of Coach Renner deleting a whiteboard section after the round. I liked Theo more than I expected. Coach Renner did not message me. Celeste did, at 11:43 p.m. Just 3 words, you were right. I stared at them for a long time. In my first life, I would have wanted that message more than oxygen. In this one, it felt too small to hold the dead girl inside me who had lost years to Celeste's convenient forgetting. I typed 3 replies and deleted them all. Finally, I wrote, I know. Then I turned off my phone. The review lasted 2 weeks. It uncovered what reviews uncover when adults can no longer avoid opening folders: a culture of aggressive framing, incomplete source tracking, speech edits made after citation approval, student researchers left responsible for cards used by speakers, and a coach who valued trophies until ethics became a public liability. Coach Renner resigned from tournament coaching but remained a teacher after what Principal Harrow called formal remediation, which meant adults still protected their own more softly than they protected students. Celeste lost her captaincy, her speaking award, and her nomination for the Summer Advocacy Institute. The team forfeited regional placement. My name was removed from all contested evidence records after version histories proved my drafts had been altered. Mrs. Vale wrote a formal letter verifying that I initiated the citation archive before the final and had requested removal of my research from unsupported materials. That letter mattered. I made 5 copies. My mother made 3 more and put one in a folder labeled Mina. Do not let schools gaslight you again. She had learned that word online and used it with terrifying accuracy. When Principal Harrow offered me a chance to rejoin debate under new supervision, I almost laughed. No, I said. I still love arguments. I just don't love being furniture in someone else's victory room. Celeste returned to school after a week of absence.
Not even.
No captain badge. Hair loose, face pale, walking through corridors that once parted for her and now hesitated around her. Some students were cruel because audiences always contain people who confuse downfall with permission. Others defended her because beauty plus shame still attracted rescuers. I avoided both groups. Avoidance was not fear. It was boundary. She found me in the library on a rainy Thursday, standing in the citation aisle, which was almost too symbolic to be real. Mrs. Vale said you'd be here, she said. Traitor, I replied, and from behind the desk Mrs. Vale said, accuracy is not betrayal. Celeste almost smiled. Almost. She stood beside the shelf, but did not come closer. I owe you an apology. I kept my eyes on the book's spine in front of me. Yes.
I'm sorry.
The words were plain. No performance.
No tears.
That made them harder to dismiss. For what? I asked. She inhaled shakily. For using your work without carrying the responsibility. For letting people think the cards were yours when I changed them. For making you feel like loyalty meant silence. For coming to your house and asking you to save me instead of asking what I had done to you. I turned then. Her eyes were red, but steady. And for knowing, somewhere, that if everything broke, they would blame you first. That was the one. The apology that touched the oldest wound. Not enough to heal it. Enough to prove she saw where the knife had been. Thank you, I said. Her mouth trembled. Do you forgive me? No, she closed her eyes. I continued, not cruelly. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way you want. But I believe you understand more than you did. She nodded, swallowing. That's more than I deserve. I said nothing. She looked toward the debate trophies visible through the library glass. I don't know what to do without it. Learn the argument before the speech, I said. She gave a small broken laugh. You still sound like my prep notes. No, I said. Your prep notes sounded like me. I did not return to debate club, but debate did not leave me. That surprised me. For a while, I thought walking out meant abandoning the part of myself that loved structure, clash, evidence, and the clean snap of a well-answered question. But the activity was not the room. The room had been poisoned. The skill was still mine. I joined the school ethics committee as a student observer after Mrs. Vale nominated me without asking, which I considered an abuse of librarian power. I helped build new tournament rules, source packets locked before rounds, shared authorship logs, no evidence card without original link and context summary, speakers responsible for explaining every claim they delivered, researchers credited publicly, coaches barred from post-review edits without timestamps. Boring rules, according to Daniel. Beautiful rules, according to me. Boring rules are what keep charismatic people from turning everyone else into scaffolding. Lena Moreno invited me to observe St. Bartholomew's practice once, and I went. Their room was less glamorous, more chaotic, and infinitely cleaner in the moral sense. When a speaker overclaimed, 3 people shouted source in unison. I nearly cried. Lena noticed and pretended not to, which made me like her. At the end of the year, Northmere held its awards assembly without a debate trophy for the first time in 7 years. Coach Renner sat in the staff rows, smaller somehow. Celeste sat among ordinary students. Daniel accepted a service award and used his 30-second speech to thank everyone who does invisible work and deserves visible credit. He looked at me when he said it. I rolled my eyes, but my mother clapped loudly enough to embarrass us both. Principal Harrow announced the new evidence ethics policy and, to his credit, did not pretend it had emerged from nowhere. This year, students reminded us that excellence without integrity is not excellence, he said. A line like that would have sounded cheesy before. Now it sounded expensive. It had cost us enough. After the assembly, I walked past the trophy cabinet again. The photo of Celeste leading us to victory had been replaced by a team photo with names listed underneath in equal-sized font. My name was there. Research lead, Mina Sol. Not cropped. Not whispered. Not attached to misconduct. Just there. I stood in front of it until my reflection steadied over the glass. Years later, people would ask why I chose law. I always gave the acceptable answer. I believed in advocacy grounded in evidence. That was true. It was also incomplete. I chose law because I once watched a beautiful speaker forget every lie when nobody slid her the truth from offstage. I chose it because I learned that cross-examination is not cruelty when directed at power. I chose it because silence, documentation, and walking away can be arguments too. I still have the index card Celeste brought to my apartment, the one with the 14-1 claim crossed out in Mrs. Vale's red pen. I keep it above my desk, not as a trophy but as a warning. The card reminds me that lies do not always begin as malice. Sometimes they begin as punchier wording, stronger impact, moral urgency, a sentence that sounds true, a coach who says we'll fix it after we win, a friend who says you're the only one who understands how my mind works. Then one day you realize you are not helping someone speak. You are holding up a fraud with your own spine. The last time I saw Celeste before graduation, she was alone in room 6A, taking down the gold countdown poster from finals week. The walls looked bare without all the butcher paper, less like a war room and more like a classroom where children had stayed too late. She turned when I entered. I thought you hated this room, she said.
Ido.
Then why come back? I looked at the table where I had once slid cards toward her, whispered mechanisms, repaired lies until they looked like arguments. To see it empty. She folded the poster carefully. I'm applying to the Summer Institute again next year. Not as a speaker. Research track. I blinked. You hate research. I know. She gave a faint smile. That's probably why I should do it. I did not praise her. Growth does not need applause every time it crawls. But I nodded. She held out the blank index cards from that Monday, the ones she had asked me to fill. I found these in my folder. I looked at them, then took one. On it I wrote in black pen, "Know what you claim." Then I handed it back. She read it and laughed softly. Almost like the girl I once trusted. Almost. That's it. That's the whole thing. I left before nostalgia could make the room kinder than it was. Walking out of debate club did not feel heroic when it happened. It felt like tearing myself out of a future I had worked for, knowing everyone inside would call the wound betrayal. But that was the day my second life began to belong to me. Not when Celeste forgot her lies on stage. Not when the review cleared my name. Not when the school changed its rules. It began when I understood that leaving can be a form of testimony. I had spent my first life standing beside people who used my credibility as padding around their ambition. In the second, I stepped away and let the structure show. Celeste did not collapse because I attacked her. She collapsed because the truth stopped arriving in my handwriting. Finals week did the rest. So if there is one thing I would tell the girl I used to be, the one who stayed late in room 6A, hungry, exhausted, grateful to be needed, it is this. Being indispensable to someone else's lie is not love, not loyalty, not opportunity. It is a cage with applause outside it. Walk out before they lock it. Let them speak. Let them source. Let them remember. And if their star speaker forgets every lie when you stop feeding her lines, do not call that sabotage. Call it the first honest round of your life.